Now then, very happy to welcome into the studio Dylan Tighe, who's a 34-year-old musician and actor who has accessed his medical records under the Freedom of Information Act and used the findings then as the inspiration for his new stage play, Record. Dylan's initial diagnosis of depression was made when he was 18. He was then later diagnosed bipolar, and the stage show also looks at his decision to come off medication and turn his back on psychiatry. He joins us now. Dylan, good morning.
Tom, how are you doing?
Must be a strange thing to sit down and see your own records like that.
Yeah, it was a strange process, but a very interesting one. I think one of the things, you know, when I was making the show, I came to the point where I really wanted to see what had been actually written about me, you know, in those notes. So reading through them was quite bizarre, actually.
Did you recognise that person?
I did in some respects, in other respects not. I mean, I suppose because some of the notes are dealing quite clearly with things which I then went on to write songs about. So for me, that was kind of a turning point in how the project developed, was to juxtapose these two portraits of me. One, a very clinical portrait from these notes, and the other, this self-portrait from the songs, often about the same thing. And actually, they were both saying extremely different things when you compared them. And I found that's what for me was very interesting.
Kind of expected almost, that when you sit down and you see how a group of professional people are seeing you at a low point in your life, that's something inside you be railing against them and saying, that's not me, that's, you know, I'm different.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't so much more what they were seeing, it was more that the approach that they were taking, it was very superficial, and I found that they were simply interpreting my symptoms, you know, and it was all about the symptoms and then leading to the diagnosis and then what medications I was put on and different medications that were being managed at different times. And in comparison to that, the songs were very much dealing with where I felt that emotional distress was coming from. Which was a story that they were not interested in.
And which is the story that you most wanted help with.
Which was the story that, yes, I did want help with, but in my own experience in encounters with psychiatry, that wasn't dealt with.
How did you come to be in front of those psychiatrists in the first place? Because you were in there at a very early age, weren't you?
Yeah, I think I was, the first time I went to a psychiatrist was about 18. And probably around the time I was doing Leaving Cert, which I found very stressful, and I was going through various different periods of depression as a teenager. So it got
intrigued. Now, did that start early on? Is it like 14, 15?
Yeah, I mean, it could have even been younger than that, you know. So at a certain point, it got bad enough that I had to go, and that I was brought to see a GP, and then I was referred to a psychiatrist.
Right. What approach did they take at the time? What did they do for you?
Well, when I went to see a psychiatrist at 18, I mean, I think like many other people, I had a consultation for, I think, probably about half an hour, and then prescribed medication.
Simple as that.
Simple as that.
I think a lot of people have an expectation that if they find themselves in front of a psychiatrist that they're really going to be listened to, and they're now in exactly the right place. I'm picking up from many people who've been to the show that that's not the reality.
Well, that's not my own personal experience. I found that repeatedly, that what it involved was a short consultation, really, to arrive at a diagnosis, which then could be translated into what medications to be put on.
Some people, I'm sure, go along and get exactly the help they need, but for you, it seems they wanted to put you on medication. Is that how you felt?
I mean, that was the approach, and that is my experience. When I was 18, I was put on a drug called Seroxat, which then was subsequently became quite controversial. There was quite a lot of lawsuits against it. It turned out that it was provoking suicidal thoughts in teenagers.
How did it affect you?
Like all of the medications I was on, they all had different side effects. Generally, with the that antidepressant particularly, it was just really a kind of lethargy, sluggishness. But later, when I was put on anticonvulsant medication for when I was later diagnosed as bipolar, then the side effects became much worse, and that was a big factor in me deciding to come off the medication finally, because I found that the medication was unworkable.
Between going on the medication and that process, how many years were you on medication?
I was on medication on and off at different periods over maybe 10 years.
And what was life like while you were on that?
I mean, it very much depended, but there was times when I found very much that the medications were compounding the problems that I had in the first place. So I went in with a certain set of problems, and through the different medications I inherited a new set which I had to deal with. And obviously, if you're obviously in the work I'm doing as performing, writing, directing, you need to be on top of your game, and that was and at certain points the medications were affecting. At certain points I couldn't remember words. I was finding it difficult to write. There was all kinds of other side effects: sexual dysfunction, racing heartbeats, sweats, palpitations, which really led me to question, what am I on, and what is this doing to me? What brought it to a head was about 3 years ago when I presented to a psychiatrist again. Even at that point, I knew that I didn't want to be on the medications, but at that point, I think like many other people, I found there was no other option. So when I found myself in that situation again, I went through the same rigmarole again, went to the GP, who said, well, we have to send you to the psychiatrist. Yeah. And the psychiatrist presented me with the same options. I said, well, I've been on those medications before to have those side effects. I don't think they're addressing the core issues of why I feel I am emotionally distressed. You're telling me, they would tell you that you have a chemical imbalance, but at the same time, there was never given a test. There's no blood test, no urine test.
I found amazing that there was an assumption from talking to you that you had a serotonin, discrepancy or deficiency. Yeah. But there was never a measure of your serotonin. No. How does that work?
I don't know. I was repeatedly given these explanations, and the most common one was that, I was, well, Dylan, if you had diabetes, then you'd obviously take your insulin. This is the same, but when you look at you can't make that comparison because there is no. There is no pathology there. You're not dealing with the same kind of.
Still
thing.
Must have felt like a big risk for you to want to come off the medication. You must have had great fears around that.
Well, I had been off them at different times, but to be honest with you, I came to the conclusion that the issues that I was dealing with were not issues that could be solved by medication. They were not. They were issues that were much deeper than something that.
Were you ever offered psychotherapy?
I was never offered psychotherapy from the official psychiatric service, but I did attend psychotherapists and psychologists a lot, and I found that infinitely more helpful.
Okay, what was the inspiration or the drive to go and look at your records, to use the freedom of information to go and take a look at your own medical records?
Well, actually, it started with the album. As I was recording this album over a period of time, and as it went along, it became clear that a lot of the songs related to my experience, both of the state of being depressed and also my feeling of disempowerment, and the feeling I had while I was being treated, and there was a lot of anger there from that kind of that feeling of just not being listened to, and that my interpretation of my situation was not valid, and that that an interpretation was to be imposed on me, which I then would have to accept. So as I was looking through the material, and as the songs took shape, I started to think how it could be presented live. And obviously from my other life as a theatre maker, then I started to think how I could expand that into a much wider project. And because there was a lot of things in the songs that I could see the backstory and that I thought might be interesting to tease out. So the show, the performance allows a much wider look.
How does it work? Though I have to say, I do find it fascinating. How does a song manage to address issues inside you that have caused you such deep, upset and unhappiness in your life?
Well, I mean, the songs are quite direct responses to the experience. So there's one of the songs called "Emergency," which is about an appointment, which is about an appointment which is in the notes. So what happens in the show is that I contrast different versions of the same event. So I present the notes themselves, I present the song, and then present a reconstruction of the appointment with the psychiatrist, so all of those three elements start to blend into each other.
Sounds fascinating. We got a text in from one of our listeners says, saw the play in Cork, both the music and the acting could stand alone, a must-see from Cormac. So it's gone well. You just, last night was the first night.
Yeah, we just
Dublin,
had the first preview in the Dublin Theatre Festival last night at the New Theatre.
And it's not just you, it's you and
it's myself, and there's two actors, Mary Lou McCarthy and Daniel Reardon, and a drummer, Conor Murray. So it's a combination of live music, theatre, film. There's a whole lot of stuff in there.
Where has it all left you? I mean, are you still in a situation where you feel like you could at some point need medication again, or?
It's interesting because I think anyone who deals with mental health issues, it's always something which can, which can come back. And I find for myself, I've discovered that it's mostly stress related. That is what provokes it in me. So for me, it's very much about trying to manage stress and to try and keep stress down. But obviously that's difficult in the theatre or music business, which is about as stressful
I was thinking
a thing as you're going to be involved in. But where it's left me actually interestingly because in a way the project, and it's called Record, it's both the musical record but also a record of the experience and of the journey, a journey of discovery of knowledge. And that's really what I'm trying to present in the show, that from the initial time when I was prescribed and medication to now, what happened in between was a whole process of knowledge for myself, that I had to dig in and look at all of the research, look at all of the alternatives, and find out, for myself what was going to work for me.
Okay.
So actually through that process I've come across a lot of information which is extremely helpful for me if I find myself in that situation again.
From the little I know about mental health, I pick up that there seems to be what works for me is a huge thing and varies greatly from person to person. I think you would need to say that many people will benefit from going to see a psychiatrist. Many people, medication does work for them. So
I think for some people it does work, but I suppose what I'm trying to say is that that ultimately what I'm trying to say in the show is that people themselves are the experts in their own experience, and that really has to be taken on board more and more. I think that an individual with experience knows what has worked and what will work for them in the future, and that a very generalized approach, and certainly a first responsive medication, I think is deeply inadequate to deal with the very personalized nature of people's distress.
Dylan, thank you very much for that. Record is at the New Theatre Dublin from October the 2nd. This is last night until the 7th, and the album is out now. Dylan Tighe, TIGHE.bandcamp.com is the website address. And Dylan, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you.